We wanted to give the users the best possible experience. We don't really want to ship kind of like a half-hearted version of the product. So our goal right now is to build the best possible IDE for developers. If something is so painful when it's broken, that's a good thing from a product standpoint. Does it behave as if it was a human developer? Like, does it take the course of action that you might take if you are solving a problem?
Welcome back to Beyond the Hype. I'm your host, Ethan. Today's episode is all about Windsurf, probably the most talked about AI code editor right now. We've got Kevin Hou, the head of product engineering from Codeium, joining Julia and me to share the inside story from their early days in GPU tech to becoming a major player in AI development tools. And trust me, you'll want to hear about the new features that Kevin previews at the end. Excited to have you on, Kevin. We met in the YouTube comment section right after I posted my video on Windsurf, and then you were doing live customer support on some user queries. So great to see you have community at the center.
Yep. I'm always hunting. I think YouTube and Twitter are probably the ones that I'm on the most, but I think a fair bit of engagement across all the platforms. It's just nice to see people using the product, honestly.
When I see people actually commenting or complaining, I think it means people really care. The worst one is absolutely crickets.
I mean, I've been building products a while. I can definitely relate to the nothing happens and you're just kind of, you want the attention, right? Even if something is negative, it's like if something is so painful when it's broken, that's a good thing from a product standpoint.
Could you start by telling us a bit about the history of Windsurf? I mean, when it first started with Codeium, I know you guys were first doing GPU-related work and then pivoted into coding and then a full-on IDE. Tell us a bit more about that story.
Sure. So there's a number of pivots here. The first of which, I guess we can start with Exafunction, which is the very first inception of the Codeium team. Then there was the pivot to Codeium, and then there was the pivot to Windsurf, if you want to call it that. So to start from the very beginning, I guess I was working with Exafunction at the time, and it was a smaller team. We were building GPU virtualization software. What this basically means is like you have a high throughput system, you need a lot of inference. Think hedge funds doing like massive inference, self-driving car companies. My background is in self-driving cars prior to my work in this field. And so any workload that had a lot of GPU load, we could basically optimize and squeeze 20% more efficiency out of your system, which for large workloads is a non-trivial amount of money saved. And so that was the Exafunction pitch, which is basically take your existing workloads, we'll optimize it, we'll make it better. This was kind of at the early days of AI boom. I would say this was around the time when like Midjourney, I think, was kind of taking off.
And before ChatGPT, right?
Before ChatGPT, and it was a good business. It did well, like revenue-wise, all this stuff. In under a year, it did quite well. But we started realizing that it was going to be, the value was probably going to accrue more on the application level. There was more to extract out of the application layer than just the infrastructure layer. We had a lot of smart brains in the room. We were like, all right, what can we do? What kind of product can we do to actually be the end user application and like squeeze more out of the infrastructure that we built? And we landed on, like, as developers, we landed on like the Copilot thing. And so GitHub Copilot was out at the time, but we noticed there were a lot of ergonomic things, quality things. 2 years ago, this technology was just not in a position where it is today. And we pivoted the company to work on this new thing that we called Codeium. And we went to market with a free autocomplete extension, first on VS Code, and then we expanded to roughly 40 different IDEs. And our main pitch, the reason we existed, was better context awareness, a lot more like ergonomic things inside of the extension itself, and then we were also free. And these three things gave us like the right to exist in the market. And we started our enterprise motion, which was focused on on-prem security-oriented companies. And so what this meant is we were taking a lot of the learnings that we had from managing GPU clusters and whatnot, and actually deploying this software inside of secure enterprises in a self-hosted way. So you could run the software stack completely disconnected from the internet, and that was a very compelling case for insert some national defense, insert a government, insert a bank or some sort of financial institution, places where there's a lot of compliance, regulation, and just honestly like security and intellectual property. And so all this to say, the Codeium business was going quite well. But what we were running into was like the pace of AI innovation, and you two can attest to this, has just been insane in the last 2 years. And we've always had this kind of ongoing research muscle at the company. And we've been discovering more and more that the amount that you could do as an agent was becoming real value. It was no longer like a Twitter demo or a toy or something that worked like 5% of the time. It was starting to get to the point where like this technology was quite helpful. And we're a skeptical company in the sense that technology optimists, but a lot of us internally, we are very skeptical of like new tools. And so there was a point when we started using some of the research the proof of concept work, which ended up becoming Cascade, our agent. And we were like, wow, this is actually helpful for our efficiency and our productivity. And that was the turning point where we were like, okay, we're probably going to need a different product surface. The patterns and paradigms of software development are going to change. And we actually have the expertise, the skills, and the distribution to make that happen. So enter Windsurf, where we could divorce ourselves from the API constraints of VS Code from a visual perspective, and then also really build at the core of an editor this idea of an agent that's kind of pair programming with you, where you could kind of flow in and out of the state where the agent is writing some code for you, you're writing some code, and you're kind of like learning and riffing off of each other. So that was really the inception story of Windsurf. Long-winded way of saying we've gone through many different stages of the company. We've learned a lot along the way, but here we are. We launched Windsurf 2 months ago, maybe? I forget when we got connected. Probably like roughly 2
Yeah, it
3
was
months.
November. I can't believe
Yeah.
it's only been 2 months since Windsurf has been out.
Yeah, and we started building this thing. We built it in 2 months. And so we had 2 months prior. We started it sometime in September, finished in November, launched, I think it was like November 13th or something around there. And yeah, here we are. We've got decent user traction. People like yourself hopefully are enjoying the product. And we're kind of on a roll. We're just shipping new features and fixing bugs and the whole thing. It's the dream.
Yeah. So, and one of my most exciting moments these days when I look at AI code editors is when I see that ready to update button on top.
Oh, yeah.
And then I especially like for Windsurf that you guys keep the changelog button directly in there so that you have a one-click way of saying, oh, what is the latest change? So please don't tell me it's just performance fixes. It's new features, fingers crossed.
New features.
And then when I see
we
that,
got a lot. Yeah, we got a lot.
It gives me a lot of satisfaction.
You'll be getting a new one, I guess, depends on when you release this. Wave 2 will be coming out in a couple of days.
Oh, I was just about to ask about that. Yeah, very excited for that.
Yeah.
So just to close the chapter on Codeium, I was wondering, is the extension as we knew it a year ago, is it deprecated?
It is not deprecated. I think the way that we see it internally, a lot of the engineering work we've done translates nicely across surfaces. We have this thing called a language server, which is basically a Go binary. And the way we've structured our products is that we like to make the application layer as thin as possible and really focus on the language server being the kind of guts, the brains. This worked really well with extensions. So we were able to ship one language server that would do a lot of the context retrieval, a lot of the computation, do the inference, and then give you suggestions. And then it was a very simple application layer, which would say, all right, you're in VS Code, use this API. You're in IntelliJ, use this API. You're in Vim, use this API. And in this way, we were able to iterate and create a lot of different extensions. And so the reason why I'm telling you this is because we've still keeping that mental model where we're investing very heavily into the language server, which means that an IDE like JetBrains, it is not Windsurf, but it inherits a lot of the quality improvements that Windsurf will have. The difference is that Windsurf, we can really control all the ways that a user might interact with our feature set. We cannot do this because of API constraints on a product, let's say like VS Code. So it is not deprecated in the sense that we are not developing on it. It's still improving, but you are just not going to get the best experience. And for example, I don't even think the agent flow, if we were to take an extreme example, I think it's very hard for an agent to feel good inside of Vim. And I would say the same thing about VS Code. Now, it's going to be a little bit easier, but like we wanted to give the users the best possible experience. We don't really want to ship kind of like a half-hearted version of the product. And in that way, we've kind of doubled down on like Windsurf being the way that you get that best experience. Does that kind of make sense?
Makes
Yeah,
total sense.
I can imagine even for simple things like showing the diffs would be
Yeah.
really difficult to do
Super
as an
hard.
extension because
Yeah.
you don't have access to that. But I think people frequently forget how important it is to actually view the changes that AI has done
Completely.
so that you can check for doing, well, simple sense checks for it. Yeah, I can definitely see that. So based on that mental model you just described, what percentage would you say is at the base layer and what percentage is at the IDE layer? Given that you guys were able to do things within 2 months to ship Windsurf, it feels like the IDE layer maybe just like 20, 10%? Would that be accurate?
Hard to pin a percentage. And as you know, code, the number of lines of code
Yeah.
is not necessarily a good indication of like complexity and all that sort of thing. What I will say to set some context is we train our own models, we own our own infrastructure, we build our own products, and we self-host our product. So there's a number of things here. So our stack is incredibly wide. That being said, we do have a fairly large team. We're about 150 people. The engineering team is roughly like 40 or 50. And I guess your original point was like how much is in the IDE layer. There is a lot in the IDE layer. I think it's just because we have more people now, we've been able to kind of make that layer a bit heavier.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily in strictly AI world. Like for example, what you just referenced, the changelog and the updates being something that you look forward to and you kind of get a dopamine hit when you click restart to update, you see a changelog, you open it up. All that sort of thing is stuff that we've customized, we've thought very intentionally about. And so the scope of what is in the IDE has expanded, not necessarily in the AI sense, but in just like how do you build a good editor. We moved the command palette to the middle to make it bigger, kind of like an everything bar type of pattern. We've added various features here and there into the editor itself. We've changed some typography to make things feel like fresh. We've modified some of the layouts. Like there are a lot of things that we've done in the IDE that are not strictly related to context retrieval and whatnot, but are very important for part of the end user experience.
Yeah, I definitely feel that's a trend where it's not just about using more powerful models.
Yeah.
Even the existing models are plenty powerful enough to do so many things. It's like Claude Sonnet 3.5 has been with us for quite some time, and there's still yet to be another model that gives you both the performance at the speed it generates and as well as the quality it generates as well,
Yeah,
right?
completely.
And the UX is what makes a difference for most developers, and I 100% agree with you.
Yeah.
And especially when Windsurf first came out, the thing I think most of AI Twitter love is the auto context part, where you don't have to manually mention, here's these 3 files you can look at, so that it tries to retrieve the right context directly from the code base.
Completely.
That was mind blowing, and I think it was so good that I think Cursor had to rush to release that feature within 3 weeks, because I can definitely feel that. I was like, okay, this is now great competition. It's getting very interesting now.
It's good for the end users, right? I
Yeah.
would still say I sleep less. We're always grinding, and I guess I slept a lot. Or I didn't sleep that much before the launch. I don't sleep that much after launch, so I guess nothing crazy has changed. But it's definitely good for the end users, right? The end experience is like AI tools just get better. People have better experiences. They're able to accomplish more, and that's just good for everyone. Good for the industry.
From a team morale perspective, what's it like inside the company to be under so much pressure, so much competition, a lot of speed? You wake up in the morning and you see that your competitors have a pixel by pixel identical feature implemented. How do you keep morale up?
Yeah, that's a great question, Julia. A lot of it is in it's not single actions, I guess, here and there that make it. It's kind of like we've built a culture that I think is pretty resilient to that sort of thing. There have definitely been mornings where we wake up and like exactly like you said, there's like an announcement or something. And I think in the early days of the company, for example, Copilot, is it X or Next?
I think it was called X. You mean the fully automated one that does the full pull request?
No. This was like 2 years ago when they were like, we're going to release a chat.
Okay. Yeah.
Forget their lab, basically. I remember distinct moments like that where, like Julia said, I like wake up, I see an announcement, and I'm like, oh, great, like here we go. But I think over time, like as I have matured, as the company has matured, as the culture has kind of formulated, we've been able to stay focused on the things that are important and kind of like gloss over a bit of the noise from competition. What that means is like we want to focus on bringing kind of these generational step changes to the industry. So for example, bringing Cascade to market, being the first agent that was like widely available and definitely the first IDE that would like integrate that very tightly. We could have operated at like a local minimum of competition of just trading blows back and forth on, let's just say, like a chat interface that didn't do the automatic context retrieval. There's probably more app mentions and more connectors that we could have hooked up and had like little incremental gains. But the team is very good at staying true to like what is the ultimate goal and like setting a larger vision so that these kind of individual day-to-day things don't sway you. So that's one side of things. And then the other side of things is I think we just have a very fun, energetic group of people. We do a lot of like just fun. We spend 10 plus hours a day together. Our office is in Mountain View. Everyone is 5 days a week in person, and culture fit is like a big part of the interview process. And so we're all just excited to hang out together and to be building a product together. It doesn't really feel like a job. It's just like you're building something cool with your friends. And in that way, morale stays high because the day-to-day is like quite exciting. It's not like you're just crunching tickets or, you know, trying to catch up to competitors. It's like you're actually just hanging out. And I think that's a big part of like staying mentally sane.
Yeah,
So
I
speaking
definitely
of
feel the Californian sunshine helps a lot. If you're doing this in the UK, in this day where sun rises at 8 and sets at 3:30, it is so miserable.
Yeah, that would be
I
tough.
can definitely see why Valley works so much harder than the UK. It is just
January,
because
no
of the
snow.
Californian sun.
It's a good time. Yeah, Julia, what were you saying?
I was going to ask, speaking of competition, there's obviously some obvious ones like Cursor. I was wondering if you zoom out, if you can think of other competitors that are maybe non-obvious, and I can give you an example. I think that Bubble is actually a competitor or somebody that you could replace in the future. All of these no-code tools, especially with a new generation that is more and more literate in using the command line and programming, even if they're not computer scientists. What are some other competitors or industries that you see replacing in the big picture?
Oh boy. Julia's good at this, getting the spice.
That's why I have her on as my co-host, because even in our own conversations, she has all the spice.
This is good. This is good. So software touches a lot of things, and I'm not gonna act like I'm the truth when it comes to looking at the industry or whatever. This is just like my vantage point. And internally, I don't think we've really had a lot of discussion about this sort of thing. But when I look at companies out there, like I think the no code is a very good example of like lowering over time, like the bar for technical competency is going to continue to decrease, and the desired quality of what you can produce will increase. So for example, it'll be very easy for someone to spin up an Instagram clone, right? And it'll become more and more important that the person instructing the agent can think about things like user experience, growth tactics, why your product should even exist relative to other products. And so I think it changes. Maybe this is more a question about like how will this change the industry and like what demands, like what skill demands will there be? But like I think my general thesis is like the barrier to entry on technical competency is going to decrease. I think like website builders are another like obvious example, but I think what website builders provide is a level of taste. When you look at a Squarespace site, you can kind of tell that it's a Squarespace site, for better or for worse, but what they've done is ensure a bar of tasteful quality, like design quality and aesthetic, that right now I don't see agents kind of like meeting necessarily.
Maybe
And
Shop
so, yeah,
gets close to that. It's kind of the minimalistic, minimally beautiful interface that AI models produce very well today.
yeah, or just like it's going to demand more out of your creativity to be able to actually instruct like what you want. It's not going to generate something creative for you without you providing that level of detail. So, yeah, there's a number of like situations and businesses like this. I think maybe another example, and you can feel free to chop this to whatever. Another example that I'm thinking of off the cuff, the like small business has a demand for some sort of, whether it be a website or some sort of internal tool, even something like a coffee shop or like a laundromat or like small family business, right, would typically have to go out and find either a consulting or like a technical consulting or contract out this sort of work. I think the maybe long-term future of those businesses is potentially, it'll certainly change. I don't want to use the word at risk because that sounds a little bit scary, but when mom and pop shop can now use an agent to generate, an internal customer support portal for themselves and no longer needs to reach for either an external tool or a consulting agency to set that up for them, it changes the game on kind of this sort of small scoped custom implementation work.
So then, who do you say Windsurf's main target audience is right now? And also how it's going to evolve, say, for the next 3 to 5 years? The cases that you just mentioned, there are engineers who know their shit. There are also like mom shops who has never touched maybe even a smartphone, right? And how do you see the customers for Windsurf changing over the next couple of years?
I think we're fairly focused on the developer persona right now. It's very easy to try and widen the scope of who you can cater to. I think at the very least, a product like Windsurf can help a non-technical person build websites, build apps. We've seen countless examples of this. We've also seen a lot of people learn how to code using Windsurf. That's always great to see. But the persona that we are focused on and what we will develop for is the persona that currently knows how to code and making engineers of all types just better. We will not probably in the short-term future, we will not focus on like someone who doesn't know how to use the command line or doesn't know how to use Git, for example. I think this is an intentional decision, not to say that they can't use the product, but when you're building something with potentially many applications, it's very easy to go searching on a bunch of these side quests and not really have focus for what your end user persona is that you're trying to satisfy. So our goal right now is to build the best possible IDE for developers, and focusing on that persona allows us to really dial in, work more efficiently, make hard calls about like what features to prioritize. And all this should result in a better product for developers. I think in the long-term future, maybe 3 to 5 years, the interface through which people will be communicating with an agent like Cascade will change. Don't have too much to say on that because I think there's still a lot of juice to squeeze on like just how do you build a better IDE integration with an agent. But in like, let's say the 5-year horizon, I think that will change. And then that's when, you've kind of you've built enough for the developer. Let's just start like inching outwards. Who are the people that, maybe we then target students and then you target people who are non-technical, right? You slowly expand, but you have to have a focus.
So in the case when you are still targeting for developers, there are currently case of Devin and the AI IDE path like Cursor and Windsurf. How do you see those two paths going forward? And for Windsurf, is the fully autonomous way that Devon is doing something that you guys are aiming for? Or is it a very different path that you think you guys will go down?
I think at some long-term future, these things will converge. The way that I've thought about this in my head is like the market is massive, and the number of people that are currently on AI developer tools, if you think about how many developers there are in the world versus how many people are, for example, paying for an AI tool, is still quite small. And so the market has an appetite for a lot of different solutions, and customer adoption will take a long time. For example, the sales cycle for us to work with a prestigious, like world-renowned company like Dell takes on the order of like months and years. And so distribution is not like an overnight thing. And so when we talk about kind of the horizon through which these two things might collide, we're kind of working a similar problem, but in different directions. And I think the industry is kind of slow enough to support both. So it's hard to say, kind of competitor. And we're just working at the problem from different directions. It's kind of like the self-driving car analogy, where you have like a company like Waymo who is working on like L5 autonomy generally, and are just they're full sending like that application use case. And then you have I don't know, let's just say like the Tesla autopilot situation, where they're approaching it from kind of like piecemeal incremental rollout, almost like the co-pilot analogy, right?
Yeah.
And these two things are on probably the same horizon, but I don't think there's a world where like one just like completely disappears, like a winner take all market. That's the way I see these things. If that provides any particular insight.
And, yeah, because even from my personal experience, I feel, AI IDEs, they help you do what you already do, like 5x faster.
Yeah.
And then the AI coding, the fully autonomous AI coding agents like Devon, they kind of take away part of that work and then just do that for you. So at the end, you will always get the 5x, but just done by very different ways.
Yeah,
like
they're done in very different ways. I guess another way of looking at this is like, and I don't know the exact answer to this, but like when will a code editor like disappear? At what point are like agents good enough that you actually like don't need to touch the source code at all? Hard for me to imagine that future. I guess true AGI would be solving that future, but then in that future, it's like you kind of got. I always say like we kind of got bigger problems to worry about in terms of like what are we gonna do as developers, or just like the world is gonna look very, very different if you achieve that level of like quality. Like if there's no marginal cost to software, it's like shoot, like there are probably bigger fish to fry about like societal problems and whatnot. And so that's like a future that you can kind of that we don't focus on that much internally. Fun lunchtime discussion, but like doesn't factor into like the product roadmap too much, to be honest.
I'm sure that assembly programmers found it very hard to imagine a future in which people would not write assembly, and a lot of years later, we're fine. We found other things to do.
The world is not just ones and zeros? What?
Yeah, I guess like punch cards to now too. I mean, there's definitely a history of things turning over. So we might get there.
Yeah. And so, we talk about agent as a keyword. It's a keyword for 2024, right? For AI.
Yeah.
How do you guys define agentic IDE at Windsurf? Because I think we see the words thrown around too much, and then the level of intelligence varies so much depending on the person that you talk to. What's yours?
Yeah. Mine, I see an agent as something that kind of mimics human behavior. I think there's a lot of like, it uses tools, or it can like self-correct, but I think that's like too narrow in definition. For me, it's more like what is the overall framework through which this piece of software, like this AI, operates? It has the characteristics of being able to use tools, sure, but that's almost like more of an implementation detail. It has the ability to self-heal. Again, there's a number of things that you could say along these lines, but ultimately, like what I go back to is, does it behave as if it was a human developer? Like, does it take the course of action that you might take if you are solving a problem? An example of this is there's like, so the thing that we're launching in Wave 2 that I've been working quite hard on is like web search and web scraping. So like, if I need to do research that reaches for the internet, like what does that look like? There's an agentic way of doing this, and then there is a not so agentic way of doing this. The distinction in my head was Google, not an agentic search platform. Sure, you could throw like embeddings in there, you can throw some like semantic search, you can throw all these other things like in there, but ultimately it's like you're sending in a query, getting a list of results, like it's a tried and true pattern, like the RAG style. If you wanted to think about this in a more agentic sense, and because the models have gotten better to the point where we can support this, the way that our web scraping works or web search works is it behaves similar to like a human would if you were researching a new topic. So if it feels it needs to do a web search, it will do a web search, after which it is not a defined path like, hey, let me open up the top 10 files and like open all those pages and then read all the contents and then do RAG on top. It's not like that. Instead, it will kind of go step by step and say, all right, I got these 10 pages as if I was on Google. What are the ones that have the highest promise? Let me like kind of rank in my head like which ones I should look at. Now, I don't need to look at all 10. I can look at all 10, but I don't need to look at all 10. Let me look at like the first one or two. And then within that, you kind of command, when you open up a Stack Overflow, I guess it's very obvious like where to look. But on a blog post, for example, you kind of go, like Command F your way through the file. You might look at different sections. And so that's, in my head, like the agentic way of approaching web retrieval and like web search. It's not, it's like a very targeted, very human-like way of retrieving information. So when we built web search, it does exactly that. It does the search. It then looks at the results. It chooses a couple pages to look at, and then within those pages, it can dial in and expand. And in that way, there's like the human element of like, oh, I read this page. Now I have there seems to be another topic that I need to research based off of this. But it's not guaranteed every time that that's going to be the case. So you want the agent to be able to make that decision for itself, given the recency of like what it's just looked at. Does that sort of make sense? These are two different ways of approaching the same problem, one of which I would categorize as agentic and one of which I would categorize as not.
It sounds like you're defining agents as a system that passes the Turing test for developers in particular.
The Turing test for developers, maybe expand on that a little bit more?
Well, the Turing test basically says you're communicating with this entity. Mm-hmm. Fools you. If it sounds like a human to you, then it reached intelligence. So what I'm hearing from you is I'm communicating with this entity. If it acts as a developer, if the output that I see could have been produced by a developer, then it passes the developer Turing test.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's an agent.
Yeah, I guess you could tie it back to like the outcome. Ideally, I guess there's a thing here, like something does not have to be effective for it to be an agent, maybe, is like one way of putting it. I mean, the hope is that these things are indeed more productive, right, more efficient, and like built well enough that they do provide value. But I just think it's like the way that the AI goes about like solving its problem is different.
Yeah, I think we certainly do see a fair share of those where, people designing some complex agentic networks and realizing, oh, wait, that could have been done with a big fat prompt. But in the web search case, in like code iteration case, you can't do that kind of iteration, as you mentioned, self-healing. To me, that's a really crucial part because it's great that AI might generate, something accurate 90% of the time, but over 3 iterations, that's less than 70% effective, which is horrible, right? For most engineering use cases, it's being able to like having that self-correct, like you mentioned, and having that knowledge grounded to other sources that makes it actually feel like more human, because humans do self-correct and computers most of the time.
Yeah. And maybe another distinction here is the self-correction can take on many forms, right? It could be a unit test, it could be a lint test, it could be maybe even just following some like organizational best practices. Every project, every PR is kind of a little different in terms of like what are the demands for like success. And when building an agent, it's important that the flexibility of understanding that success criteria could be different and how to verify different types of success criteria is important. If you were developing something that was not agentic, you would maybe say, oh, like, let me hard code these 5 different rules that have to pass for the generation to be considered successful. It's like a different way of like looking at the problem. One is like very constrained and one is a bit more, it's like generalized intelligence.
Yeah. So going a bit further down the agentic rabbit hole, it's because I do love the agentic workflows. It's how much do you see that workflow being baked into Windsurf, into Cascade's capability, and how much do you see that as being defined by the users themselves? Because out of a lot of recent experimentation, I found that even without, this is a Cascade version from last month, right? That's the main one that's been running. Even with a few simple rules that I've added to Cascade memories, and say, oh, hey, run this for your playwright end-to-end test, and do not stop until you see the test passing on the other end. And then it then knows to go into that loop of make the UI changes, run the playwright test, and then does it work? Oh, it doesn't. Look at the error, fix. But it's the users, if they didn't know to write this into the rules file, they wouldn't be able to get this kind of even more agentic capability out of the exact same model, exact same underlying thing.
Totally.
So how do you see those Windsurf being
Totally.
custom?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of education and intuition that's built up over time. For example, like you knowing that you had to make or could make changes to a rules type of system in order to improve the quality, or even just the general skill of being able to prompt and know when to be verbose, know when to be general. For example, one of the situations that came up this morning is like knowing when to ask for a plan of action before going ahead and like starting to execute. Like if you're a more seasoned Windsurf user or Cascade user, you might, for something very complicated, you might ask for the plan first before it goes off and tries to like muddle with your code base on something that might need some course correction in the planning stage. So it's almost like building up that intuition. Now, there are some things that we can do in order to make that process better, both from like a kind of like normal UX standpoint, and then also some of the things in the agent. So an example being something that's going to ship in wave 2 in a couple of days is the notion of like an auto-generated memory. So the idea that, let's just say you went through the flow of running your playwright tests at the end of your trajectory or your conversation. You made a bunch of changes, then you ran it, and then you kind of told it like, keep going, like don't stop. And you did this in the conversation, or maybe it just notices that we are also rolling out like an integration with the terminal so that it's more context aware on like what you're running in the terminal. Let's just say you kept repeatedly running your npm run playwright test. It will remember that automatically on your behalf and bake that into its internal understanding of your workflow. This is called like an auto-generated memory. So the pattern is a little bit similar to like the rules, but it is completely automatic and under the hood. You can still tweak these things if you need, if you think that like a memory that was stored, for example, was like a bad idea. But these are ways that we're trying to guide the agent into following better practices and therefore creating better performance. So in your case, you wouldn't have to know that I can go into the rules. It would just kind of happen on your behalf.
Yeah. Then for those use cases, how much do you guys imagine you would be able to, in the long term, bake those things in? As you mentioned, say, the intuition to know to ask the agent to make a plan. Not many people would know, and depending on your estimation of the feature size of, oh, this will be a large pull request, therefore my intuition is I need to ask AI to make a plan. Can it not be done in a way that where, the Cascade notices something that's sizable and then decides for itself that it needs to make a plan so that, building the user intuition, like passing it on to Cascade. Yeah, I'm not sure. What's your current plan around that?
Yeah. I don't know exactly how this will become, how this will come into fruition. Like, I think you bring up an interesting point. Like, there's so many different personas too that might want that. Like, for example, some people want the abstraction of not knowing. It doesn't need to know everything that's going on. Like, just do it for me. And then there's some people like my sister, for example, she's non-technical. She is learning, and so she uses it with explicit instructions to like not make any edits on my behalf, but like explain pretty clearly like what's going on and like lead me to the right answer. And like that's an example of something that sure you could put as like a mode, like a student mode. But then if you follow that pattern, like how many, like what, there's never going to be an end of like the number of personas that you kind of want to support. So it's like a very hard user experience question. Like at what level are these things, should these things be baked into the product, right? And what level do you kind of try and make a generalized system? So our auto-generated memories is an example of a way to try and generalize this, where you should only ever instruct this thing once on a particular pattern or practice that it should be beholden to. So yeah, I mean, I think these questions are like, these are great questions. I don't know exactly how that they come to fruition, but that's the general way that I'm thinking about it.
The automatic memory feature, I very much look forward to that. And it was quite funny that when I was looking at the last Cascade version, and quite a few other viewers also commented that would be a really nice feature to be added to the next version. And clearly, I think you guys saw that. Or maybe you guys were already on it way before we even suggested.
We're seeing the same things.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're seeing the same things. Yeah. But I mean, ultimately, like rules is a bit of an anti-pattern as intelligence gets better. I think we've always seen, we wanted to build the manual rules because we don't live in a vacuum. Like people have used Cursor, they've used Cursor rules.
Yeah.
People are not as they're just used to what they know, right? And so rules was an important thing for us to implement as a way to kind of introduce people to this concept, or just bring some familiarity for those who are coming from other products. But ultimately, the end goal is not for you to have to instruct and like define very clearly, like, hey, I use single quotes instead of double quotes. Like these things should sort of be intuited, and that's a very small scale example case, but the hope is that this, as intelligence gets cheaper and better, we are able to intuit more of these things that are kind of high level. You might start thinking about like larger, just architectural ways that the company that you're working at adopts into their code base. And these things should not have to be explicitly named. Rather, they should be kind of automatically either retrieved or memorized by our system.
I can see that this is something that has to be built into the agent, such that not just it learns from the user's behavior, but even prompts users to try to see give them different choices, see how they choose. And then, at the end, so rather than just, the user says this to me 3 times in the past three workflows, is it because they prefer this? Or is it because they don't know a better workflow?
Yeah, it's like a back and forth, and it's tough, right? We are basically trying to take, here's like Cascade, and here's like the human. We're trying to close the gap of understanding between these two things. But then also injecting a bit of like best practice, right? As you're describing, like, is this really the best way to do things? Is the user really doing the right thing here? It's a hard problem. There's no silver bullet, but we are trying to position ourselves in a situation where, there are these guardrails and like features that can help improve, and then those features will improve, and then the agent will improve, and then the models will improve, and everything just kind of like, there's like mini wins here and there that will overall just make the entire experience better.
Yeah. And you mentioned emergent behaviors, right, from users of you guys. I'm sure you're getting loads of data and seeing how people use Windsurf in very surprising ways. What was the most surprising way that you found people using Cascade or being able to achieve something that you guys didn't think was either possible or very unorthodox?
Yeah. So we built Cascade very much for the developer, for the person who works on a large code base with potentially many different projects within it, and like that was the persona, and largely that's because we are building for ourselves. we have a big code base, we have many people, we have different functions. Like we wanted it to be able to satisfy our constraints. I guess what was surprising, and maybe looking back, it's like, okay, this is obvious. The non-technical user really leapt onto Windsurf in a way that I did not anticipate, and also did things with Windsurf in ways that I didn't think were possible. An example being, there was someone else's parent at the company who, and I use parents in the sense that like they non-technical, like they've never used the command line, that sort of thing. But they were able to kind of grapple with Windsurf and deploy a site to production, right? Going all the way from, let me build, like iterate on the actual like website. I don't know how to run these things on my computer, but like Cascade will run it for me, all the way to, they created the agent knew how to tell it how to create a GitHub account, knew how to make a repo from that, and then proceeded to push the GitHub pages as a means of getting this into production. And this is all without any guidelines from us explicitly telling it, hey, this is probably the way you want to do a deployment. And so seeing that end-to-end flow of someone going from like zero technical skill and being able to like go from idea to production, like they're still using Cascade to say like, all right, publish this change. And behind the scenes, Cascade is running like a git add, git commit, git push type of pattern. Seeing the way that people have been interacting with Cascade in that way was very surprising and very cool. Another behavior that I thought was surprising, I've had friends who tell me, even for the smallest of tasks, copy changes, simple refactors, variable renames, they just go to Cascade now. They don't actually like type the thing out. Like it surprised me how much autocomplete has basically decreased in importance and the agentic flow has increased to the point where like, yeah, these people are smart. Like they know how to code, but it's just easier for them to then just instruct Cascade to kind of make that change in a matter of seconds as opposed to a minute where they would go in. And to me, that was a very surprising user behavior. We know these things are possible. It's just like I would have assumed that if you know how to do something like simple like that, you would have just done it. But it really has rewired the way that people approach coding.
It sounds like you're very well in touch with your users. You observe them using the product. You are monitoring social media. I wonder, are there more automated ways in which you're learning from what the users are doing? So are you logging activities? Are you storing the code? Are you training on the code?
Yeah. I'm doing a lot of things that are probably not scalable. I text a lot of people that use the product. I watch YouTube videos of the people that are using the product. I'm in the comments. So I'm doing a lot of things that are not scalable. I wish there was some way for us to get a better pulse on like user happiness that wasn't us going out and like reading a bunch of qualitative feedback. I guess as the legal disclaimer of like your question, we are not doing those things. Like there's like code telemetry stuff. There's like settings that people can configure in their profile. So it's not super helpful or like productive for me to kind of go in like the logs and like view people's stuff because most of the time like it's kind of obfuscated. And so the best way that I have is through these kind of like second derivative sentiment online type of thing and just being very proactive. But at some point we will need to kind of go to a more qualitative approach. I guess there are ways that I can see with low granularity what is going on. So an example being, we have this metric called percentage of code written. This is very helpful for autocomplete. It's the idea of how many characters did we write versus how many characters did the human write. This takes into account backspaces and all this sort of thing. So we developed this a while ago, and this is a way for enterprises to see just how much value the autocomplete product brings. As the modalities have changed, autocomplete, command, then we had chat, and now we have Cascade. This number is like crazy different depending on which features you use, because Cascade is going to generate 100x more characters than an autocomplete would. And assuming that the quality is correct, it should start dominating the number of characters that a human would write. So we look at those sorts of metrics to just see kind of directionally, like, are we providing value? And this gives us a good sense of, like, yes, we are doing good work. at a very like aggregate level. So we can say like, all right, TypeScript developers, what is the acceptance rate of Cascade changes going into the project? And was there a regression in anything that we did? So like one of the examples is like if we ship a new model or if we ship a new feature, we can run experiments on this thing and basically say, all right, before and after, how does it perform on those metrics, like the acceptance rate of a Cascade, for example? And that's a way for us to get a pulse check on how good things are going.
So given that you're not logging any of the code, you're not training on the code right now, do you have a philosophy similar to Apple where you don't want to build a moat around people's private data? Or do you see a future where maybe you trade a free product in exchange of getting a license to the code that's written with the product? I guess the bigger question is,
Interesting.
do you see a moat in the data that's flowing through your system? And do you plan on capitalizing on it to maybe eventually compete with Sonnet, with Anthropic in general?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think the biggest benefit that we've seen from having a free product is not necessarily like the code that is generated by our users. It is more that we are able to very quickly iterate on an infrastructure change or a model change. Like we are in the business of trying to create our own models. And so we would be much slower if we didn't have a production application that was used by hundreds of thousands of people where overnight you could sample and say, all right, this model is better than this model. Let's like go with this one. So that's really like one of the biggest exploitations we found of having a very generous product. I mean, ultimately, like the way that we have approached our kind of go-to-market strategy is as individual developers, we kind of empathize a bit more with like the solo developer or like just the average, like our friends, right? And so we've made very intentional decisions. Like we lose a lot of money on the individual product. I know it is an expensive product, and that's like kind of the sentiment online, but like we lose a lot of money on these products. And like to us, that is worth it because we just want to build the best product for our friends effectively. And we have an enterprise motion that is responsible for actually generating revenue and making the business like a real business and a long-standing business and make sure we don't disappear. The amount of money that is in the enterprise space is kind of dwarfing the amount of money that's in kind of the prosumer individual space. Like a lot of good developers, they just work at companies, and those companies are willing to fund these sorts of tools. So it changes a little bit of like the feature set. All that to say, really the goal of the consumer tier is to like build the best possible product. It's not really like a moat data collection type of thing. It's just we need a space to play. It's much faster, much easier to play with a large, hopefully happy customer base that then we can then translate into features and products for an enterprise tier.
Makes sense.
So then for the consumer tier, do you plan to, I mean, right now you use Claude and GPT-4o, and I'm sure you probably at one point, if the pricing makes sense, integrate O1 at some point. Probably not in the near term, but do you see yourself actually building a custom model based on data that you guys build up over time? Or is it going to be still just the model layer that goes on top, say focusing on, say, the application logic, focus on the data context retrieval, focus on, feeding information, getting context to feed the information better into the frontier models? What's the plan for you guys?
Yeah. I think if we wanted to do that, we are fairly well positioned in the sense of like the experiment pattern that we talked about, like the rapid iteration and being able to test these things at scale. Our philosophy has always been we should give the best product. I know I've been saying that a bunch of times, but the way that manifests in like this specific scenario is assuming the cost and economics works right. We would love to give everyone O1. There are other drawbacks to O1 that I think popular sentiment online.
So slow.
It's so right. It's so slow. It's so expensive. So honestly, is that the best product? Like maybe not, and that's why we haven't really integrated it. We're testing it out internally, and it is slow. And so it's the point where like if Sonnet can just do it, or 4.0 can just do it, we should just do that. but we always want to use like kind of the cutting edge of intelligence. And the cutting edge of intelligence, like we just mentioned, is across many different axes, not just pure quality. Pure quality, it's latency, and it's cost. And so those three things will inform what models are most relevant. I don't want to be in a position where we're like married to a llama deployment that is just not the best model, and suddenly, OpenAI's new model comes out and it's just better on all axes. Like, we should not be beholden to the fact that we sunk effort into this llama model and like we built relationships there. We should just be willing to always give what is best. And so the amount of money that I'm seeing going into the space, these models are just going to continue getting better. Like Anthropic is probably cooking up something new. Haiku will get better. O3 will probably be quite good. You're seeing this like DeepSeek stuff. So like the entire industry is just kind of taking off, and the models, the intelligence is just getting so much better that I would always want to give the best experience possible. So if that means a public model, yeah, we'll use that. If that means an open source model, we'll use that. So that's the way that we think about this problem internally.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense. And also when you mentioned the pro users, right? And sometimes maybe this might be the super experienced indie hacker or a small 3-4 people person team, which I think we'll see tons more with the abundance of AI tooling.
Totally. I mean, you can accomplish so much more, right?
Yeah. With pricing wise, are you guys thinking of something along, the Devin and ChatGPT Pro type, where giving people something way more powerful with way less limitation? And is that a direction that you guys would consider? And it just seems that, $20 per month seems to be the ceiling for most consumer AI products. If you go above that, it's like, how dare you?
I know.
And the community goes outrage.
Yeah.
But I can definitely see, pro users wanting a lot more. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And I was actually just talking to a friend about this morning. It's like, $20 is, obviously there's different countries and there's different currencies and everyone's in a different position, but like $20 is a fair price to pay for such an increase in productivity and output. I'm not going to die on this hill because I know everyone has like different circumstances, but if you think about like the US developer market, for example, $20 is a steal, right? And $500, I think that's the price of Devin, like that becomes a bit more of a conversation, but there is like a spectrum in this. If you want to do the the polling and the research and the sentiment to see like what people's appetite would be for that, I see no problem in giving people more. And so when you would be shocked at the amount of compute that actually goes into making something of this quality. So we gave people the option, instead of these kind of like very, very complicated tiering systems where we would have like a 500 and then a 200 and then right now we have like a 60 and a 20. Instead of doing that, we should just allow people to like purchase basically more credits with favorable pricing as you increase more. And so there is a world where you can spend a lot of money, and we see a lot of customers spending a lot of money on additional credit purchases. So the ceiling is technically like infinite based on your usage of Cascade. If you wanted to do every change with Cascade, people are out here buying hundreds of dollars worth of credits a month, and they are able to hit that kind of like prosumer price tag. Mm-hmm. But we don't want to like prevent people from using it if they just want to operate at kind of like a $20 a month tier. So we're trying to allow for flexibility. Pricing is one of these things that someone's always going to be kind of upset about. And so you got to kind of just like stick to your lane.
Yeah, I remember when Windsurf was first released, I looked at the price tag. I was like, yeah, I'm going to lock in that price right now because I'm not getting anything better value than $10 per month.
Yeah. And I'm glad you did. It's an interesting world. But the nice part is, and I hope this analysis is correct, the cost of the current day's intelligence is going to be much cheaper, let's just say a year from now. And that should just be hopefully favorable to this sort of pattern. Now, you might say the model will get 3x better and the price will be 3x more. And then in that case, you're still kind of in the same dilemma. But yeah, that's hopefully we're in the right directional trend.
I mean, just last year, we started the year with GPT-4 Turbo at $15 per million input token and ended the year with DeepSeek V3 on similar intelligence level at 30 cents.
Yeah,
That
it's
it
nuts.
feels completely nuts. I mean, even
But it's
compared
great.
to
I mean, it's great
GPT-4o,
for
it's like
great for
$3. Yeah.
This is kind of what
I
I
look
mean.
forward
by,
to
like,
when you guys do DeepSeek V3 and then give us a ton more, even like flow actions. That'd be sick.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
One of my biggest priorities is just getting the cost of flow actions. Like a dream world of mine would be we can somehow price this thing and take into account the P99 of users and the P50 of users to somehow come out with a price that's like, just don't worry about flow actions. Because I would agree, it's tough to think about flow actions all the time and like feel like you're tied to a currency and feel like the tool has to be always working for you. Because the nature of these AI tools is that they're kind of unpredictable. So I very much empathize there. The thing that is like the holy grail, right? You remove the usage-based consumption pricing and just give everyone as much as they want. But so far with the current pricing, it's pretty difficult. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of noise online, right? Give us O1 and all this stuff. And it's like, is that the full story? There's a lot of stories around bring your own API key too. That's another theme that we've seen. Part of me is like, sure, we'll give you your API key. It's a bit of a headache on our side, but like, yeah, we'll give you your API key. You're just going to pay 3x more than you would if you used our pricing, you know? So it's one of these things where it's like, there's a lot of sentiment online, but you just got to stay focused on like what's actually important.
Yeah. I think dealing with launches gets so much more difficult because compared to, I think, traditional software product, AI cost scales so quickly with consumer demand. And unlike software costs where your margin was already pretty high, it's fine if you want to keep the price low. But for AI, it's like,
Yeah.
when you look at that OpenAI bill, I'm sure you see some skyrocketing numbers in your
Oh my
first
gosh.
month of
I mean, you wouldn't
Cascade.
believe, right? Like, I'm sure you were tapped into this, and Julia, you've also used the product in this time period. When we first launched, like, our providers had never seen a product with this level of growth, right? And so they just don't have enough. This is my perception. They don't have enough hardware to be able to raise our rate limits, and so you're seeing people complain about, oh, I can't use the product. Like, there's rate limits, but it's all problems of success. And like people just had no idea the appetite and people's willingness to like, people loved it, right? And it was great.
Yeah.
But you run into problems like that where like these things are hardware constrained and it's NVIDIA graphics cards are hard to find. And so, yeah, you're kind of dealing with there's a lot of variables that go into just making the thing available.
Yeah. And I remember even just for September to October before Windsurf came out, I thought, oh, maybe Cursor's already won the game. It's, Composer has been great. That experience is great. And then you guys came about. It's like, hey, by the way, we just did this. Here you go. And then go, oh, fuck, this is so much better. Oh, need to beep that part out. And
well, hopefully
yeah,
we'll just
it's
keep
the,
you here. Hopefully we're moving fast enough where we're able to provide more features. I mean, Wave 2 will be exciting. I'm excited for you to get your hands on it. I mean, we got a number of things in there, like the auto-generated memories that you just said. I think the web search is actually like a game-changing step function in terms of like the intelligence, right? You're suddenly unlocking anything that's available on the web, GitHub links, blog posts. Like you can literally have this thing just follow tutorials. It's just insane.
You talked about this too much. Can you show this to us now?
Yeah, cool. Okay, yeah. So what we basically did. All right, let me give you a good example. Let me find. So one of the things that it's like a fun thing is I've been using a blog post that I wrote way back on, every now and then I like to document what I've been doing just to like put it on my personal blog so I can remember how things are done. So one thing I was doing was taking this demo site and turning this into, like I'd written a blog post on how to build a waitlist and I listed out a bunch of the APIs needed and all this sort of thing. So one of the things that we can say is like, build me a waitlist page for this project that follows the instructions in this blog post. So make sure in write mode, there's now a thing called enable Cascade Web Tools. So yeah, we're in Sonnet, and then so first it's actually going to, I'll kind of walk you through what it's actually doing here. So it's going to read the actual page, and this is because I explicitly pasted a URL. Now you could ask a question that is more, and we could do this after, it'll ask a question that's a bit more like relevancy based, and it'll probably do a search for it. But in this case, it didn't feel like it needed to do a search because we gave it a URL, if that makes sense. So we've got that. And then what it's doing is it's viewing this page. Can you see that? Oh, I showed.
Yeah, I can see. Oh, I can't see the web page, but I can see
the web page. Okay, well, yeah. So there's a web page if you go to this link. And what it's doing is it's kind of like agentically looking through what is important. So here you can see that there's 3 sections that are part of this chunk, right? There's a section on the Neon database. There's a section on how to use Codeium chat, which was at the time the way that I was kind of looking stuff up. And then there was also a section on how to configure Next.js. And then there was also another chunk that it read about React hook form, how to monitor the results, and I like this app called Postico, so I wrote about that, and then a little bit of conclusion. So what it did is it looked at this, it chunked it up, decided that these were the relevant parts of the page that it needed to read in order to execute the query that I had. So you're seeing that there's these particular pages. Close this out. And then it's going off and it's summarizing a bit of what it's doing. And then it's able to basically successfully, so we want to accept this. So we also have a terminal integration. So there's this button called Go to Terminal, which is quite cool. So you can actually look at, this is a cascade process. So when it ran npm install, it's actually running npm install inside of your environment. So if you're using virtual environments or a dev container or some sort of special setup, it will recognize that. So it should be a bit more seamless. So in this case, we're running npm install, and then now it's actually going off and executing. It even creates, writes out the SQL and all this stuff. So it's successfully able to follow the blog post. And you're seeing that if you go to the blog post, this is more or less like the instructions on what you want to do. I can now go through and like accept everything. So yeah, it made the back end, made the front end, and because I wrote the blog post, I kind of know that this is in line. Another example, so I want to show you search too. There was a cool demo. So one thing that I was doing was, let's see, reset this. There's another cool demo. Oh, okay, cool. There's another cool demo where you can ask it like kind of more, like use the web search capability here. So in order to stay relevant and like topical, I was doing a demo with like Squid Game 2. All my friends are talking about this show, so I was like, all right, let me like, build something with this. So I was able to say like, build me a voting app that can let users select their favorite Squid Game 2 character. And then because of like training data, right, this stuff is not going to be available inside of its training set. I could tell it right now, like look up the cast, the current cast of characters. And what this will do is decide that it needs to look for information about like the actors and characters. So here you're seeing, so you're seeing that it's able to look at a bunch of different sites. There's this article, etc. And then you're seeing, so this is one of the drawbacks. As web scraping, our web scraping needs to improve, but also you're seeing like a very content or a design heavy site like Netflix is probably not going to yield the best results when it comes to actually like reading and web scraping. So this is an example of it deciding, okay, this is actually not that helpful. Let me go to the next one. Uh-oh. Maybe that one had a paywall. Who knows? Okay, well, it's
I think very cool that's you didn't have to use any, two specific ad keywords to trigger this thing.
That's the whole idea,
so
right?
that it tries to
like
figure
that.
out it needs that additional information to do that. So much like the auto context. And I feel this is the way that all of the AI coding tools are. Especially I think pioneered a lot of it by you guys.
Yeah. I think at is like a pattern of the past. Sometimes I like at because it gives me like a little bit of a dopamine hit that I'm like, all right, like
I know this shit.
I know that. But like it's really not needed.
Yeah.
And so this is an example of that. Like you could at web, and we did introduce the concept of like, all right, like at web, like whatever. But this is the part that's agentic. It's able to infer like, I should probably reach for search in order to do this. And now you can see everything here is predicated upon the page, so this article, and if you look
Yeah.
at the article that was read, like you can see this is indeed all the characters, the characters and actors and actresses that play those characters, and then it's able to use that as context going into here, and now you can see, you know the magic of Windsurf, it's able to successfully generate the full stack application here. But like these are examples of like, if you ask it temporal questions, like we can try again, what's the latest version of React and what are the breaking changes? Instead of looking for stuff that's in memory, it's going to look online, choose the best articles that hopefully best summarize this information. It's going to read content. Yeah, it looks like it's reading some of the changes. And
I was
then
going to
it's
say
able
that, but says even for non-developers feels strictly better than ChatGPT. I actually asked it this morning, what's the difference between Cursor and Windsurf, and it said I have no idea what Windsurf
yeah.
instead of doing
Yeah.
a search.
Well, yeah, I think this is just where the agentic pattern just like differs so drastically from the non-agentic, and this is like maybe a better way of just highlighting these things. Trying to think of like other examples. Oh, something I really like here. We get a lot of questions about how to use the product, and so we maintain docs online. So what I did is I added an @ Ooh, is this merged in? Yes, it did merge in. Okay, so I was working on this last night, so this is like very, very new. But there's Windsurf help docs online, right? And one of the nice benefits of this is now, because we can now scrape the web, we can I really see as a way to educate users on like what's possible. So for example, Windsurf help docs, like what is a flow action credit? And now you're able to like actually RAG, or like, I guess it's not really kind of RAG, it's like the agentic version of RAG over the contents of our documentation, and now get like self-help within the Cascade panel. So here it read, whoops. You can see this. So it's reading like the docs that we wrote about what are flow actions. It read how to view your usage, like how to upgrade your plan, like all these sorts of things. And this is just like a nice side effect of the feature.
Does
that
it
we
even
built.
analyze the images that gets fetched?
It doesn't right now. But like you can see how
It pulled the information in.
it pulled the information in, right?
Yeah.
And this is what I'm super excited about, the way that we're building this product. It is not like, how would you do this if you were not an agent? You would say, all right, let me pull this page. Let me look at every single page that was linked from this page. Let me ingest every single image and summarize every image as well. Like, you don't know what action to take next because it's deterministic. Whereas with this agent, what we could say is, based on this page, we're looking at this content. Do we need to look at the image? Do we not need to look at the image? Okay, let's run a multimodal on this image. Because that is more expensive, takes more time, right? If there's a link to another page, we can decide on the fly. That's probably important for me to go look at. Like, we've had instances of this where someone will paste in, like I pasted in a Next.js doc, and it was actually like, I don't think you want this one. I think you actually want like the one that's linked from here. So it went off and like searched that one too, and then gave me the right answer based on the contents of that page. So it's so much more similar to how a human would interact with a web browser as opposed to Google search.
Just
or,
one back and forth, right?
Exactly.
So it's like, look at one doc, RAG, do the thing. It's more, look at the thing, find more irrelevant information. Oh, this doc is deprecated. Move on to the next.
Exactly.
I remember having the similar issues for Next.js 15 when it was released. No models was trained on Next.js 15 data, and they kept generating the wrong caching formula every single time, and you had to add docs or manually put it in the rules. It was very painful.
So I think that's like a thing of the past. Hopefully, you won't need to reach for ats. Like, again, like I said, at is really just a nice way to just like view some like shortcuts.
In the cases where maybe 5-10% case it doesn't work, you have that backup that you can manually shove it in and say, hey, look at this thing.
Exactly. So
very exciting.
This will be cool.
Yeah.
You'll use it in a couple days.
Yeah, very, very exciting. I think we heard a lot about, your thoughts of future of agentic coding. It's a very exciting world that we're heading into.
Super
And
exciting.
I know it puts a lot of stress on you, but Julia and I love seeing the competition in the AI coding space.
Love watching from the sidelines.
The progress has just accelerated over Christmas. Honestly, you guys
We
coming
got you.
out, there's Lovable, there's Bold on You, there's so many new things coming up. I mean, Replit, it's
the
it's
Hunger
amazing.
Games, and we get to watch it.
Yep. Yep, we're living it. So I'm glad that you're seeing the benefit. I mean, hopefully we'll separate ourselves. I mean, as someone who's built this product, I believe that we are superior. Obviously, the users have to learn that for themselves. But I'm glad that you two can use these products. Sounds like Julia, you should give it a shot.
Oh, I actually did. So I was telling Ethan this morning that 3 years ago, I spent maybe 2 months with a college friend trying to build this application that would look into my personal journal and then produce statistics and find correlations between physical health and other aspects. And yeah, I built it this morning. It's a nice Streamlit app that's running on my desktop right now.
That is one of the best testimonials that I've heard. That's fantastic.
Thanks for coming on to the podcast. And I'm sure we'll be doing another one in, well, let's say half a year's time.
Yeah.
I think things will have changed so much, and I'm sure we'll be updating on a lot of our viewpoints that we talked about in this one.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks, Kevin.